All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, by the way, to all the mothers, especially my mother. I hope that my mother has the best Mother's Day.
Better than my mom's.
Better than all of your moms. And I wanted to. By the way, this is apparently the untitled podcast, or currently titled "Not Today, Kitty: Search for Truth." We're going to be talking
like a cat,
like a cat, yeah, like a little cat that that normally, normally gets his way, but not today. Not today, Kitty. The subject today is ayahuasca. We are once again, kids, going to be talking about drugs, and I think that, we've got Stuart here, by the way, who is
a drug addict,
who's got a real drug, some healthy drug experience that he's going to share with us. And with us as well is Lynn and Cade and Calvin and Jake, and so I wanted to talk a little bit, actually. So last time I sort of started off with some quotes that I thought kind of led us in an interesting direction, and I was sort of looking for a similar quote. And some of you guys know Terrence McKenna, the sort of the drug advocate, I guess, who talks a lot about psychedelics and a lot about sort of the spiritual aspect of drugs and things like that. And I thought, well, I'm going to go look up some of his quotes and see if one really strikes me. Well, about 20 of them struck me. So I put about 4 of them together, and I'm going to string them together so that it's not necessarily all in the same context, but I want to start it off with some of these thoughts. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed. We have to create culture. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Don't even listen to NPR. Create your own roadshow. The nexus of space and time where you are now is the most immediate sector of the universe. And if you're worrying about Michael Jackson or Bill Clinton or somebody else, then you are disempowered. You're giving it all away to icons which are maintained by an electronic media, so that you want to dress like X or have lips like Y. This is shit-brained, this kind of thinking. This is all cultural diversion. And what is real is you and your friends and your associations, your highs, your orgasms, your hopes, your plans, your fears. And we're told, no, we're unimportant. We're peripheral. Get a degree, get a job, get this, get that. And then you're a player, and you don't even want to play in that game. You want to reclaim your mind and get it out of the hands of cultural engineers who want to turn you into a half-baked moron consuming all this trash that's being manufactured out of the bones of a dying world. Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. If the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness don't include the right to experiment with your own consciousness, then the Declaration of Independence isn't worth the hemp it was written on.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Quite an indictment.
End of podcast. And I thought,
solid.
Yeah, I thought that was such a great way to start. And I suspect everybody here, by the way, is pro psychedelics or pro legalization, or how many of us have taken psychedelics?
Yeah.
All of us? Okay, so all of us.
Everyone's raising their hand.
Yeah.
You can't see that.
Yeah. This will be used against you in the court of law.
That's why there's a video of this?
Yeah, exactly.
I may be the only one who has a negative experience with psychedelics, but that's another story for another podcast.
It is another podcast, although I'm curious, did that negative experience with it, well, first of all, did that negative experience, what am I trying to ask you? Did that cause you to have a negative viewpoint on it? Do you think that it shouldn't be legal, or do you think that it's dangerous? I mean, what was it, a positive negative experience, if that could be, if you can maybe put it that way? Like, did you learn from it, or was it?
So I still can't wrap my mind around the trip itself. I did get in legal trouble over it.
Sure.
So it had some real world negative side effects,
Yeah.
But it also probably deterred me from going on a path that I was headed down that was bad. I was headed on a path of using all kinds of drugs and just using them wild. I way overdid mushrooms, drunk, late at night, 18 years old. Yeah. So it's it's hard to sum it all up. Like I said, it's something we could delve into later.
And we will.
But I guess what I'm saying is psychedelics should definitely be taken with caution, because if you want to break on through to the other side and you're not really ready for it, and you get a little bit of a breakthrough that you're not prepared to handle, once it's set in, it's there.
That's actually the point of that quote that I got hung up on was, it says you break through the abyss and you discover it's a feather bed. And I like that quote a lot, but I have a major issue with that.
I kind of do too.
Because sometimes
It could be a bed of thorns.
yeah, or like a cave of snakes, or just a giant abyss. And like being in that abyss, disconnected from your physical body, can be horrifying.
Yeah, well, and I think, and I don't fully understand the quote or the context. In fact, there was no context in it. I took that part of the quote for what it was. And it's worth pointing that that's the part that starts with nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. So I don't know that he's necessarily specifically talking about, hey, take these drugs and you will land on a feather bed. And I don't necessarily think that's what he's referencing.
Yeah. I think we're experiencing a point in our culture right now, though, where psychedelics are kind of back in fashion, and that's part of it. Is it's like, oh, it's just you can go to this totally different place, and I think some of what Cade is saying, and what I would certainly stress, is that you're going to go to another place, but it's not like you're not going to Coachella with like your Indian headdress on. Like you could go to
A bad place.
yeah, and I think that does get stressed, but maybe not enough. It's like, I mean, I know some girls that have gone down to Peru to the jungle, and they're like, oh, this is, everybody's doing it. We're going to go for the ayahuasca retreat. And after 24 hours after the first night, they're like, get us out of here. This is, what have we done?
Yeah.
This is not cool.
Right.
This is not safe. This is, but yeah, you can have obviously you can have a euphoric experience. There's a spectrum of like good to bad experiences. And I think at the point we're at in our culture right now, it is kind of glorified as a, in the whole package of information should be included that like it's more of a Russian roulette experience.
Yeah.
Like you are going to spin the chamber, and there's no like somebody just said, like once that train leaves the station,
It's gone, baby.
yeah, you're strapped in, and good luck.
I was in the hospital for 2 days.
Damn.
Which is pretty impressive for a psychedelic experience.
Yeah,
Most people-
they were trying to. They ended up having to strap me to the bed, and they thought I completely lost my mind. Psilocybin doesn't show up on a drug test, so they drug tested me. And the only drugs they could think of that could have caused this was cocaine. There was cocaine in my system, and then lots of booze. And they thought I had just fried my mind. This was a small town hospital, and they said, "Oh my God, he's using cocaine. He's fried his brain.
He's tripping on cocaine.
He's tripping his ass off on cocaine. He cooked his brain." And of course, once I started to come to a little bit, and they were able to get me to unlock my phone, they started digging through and realized that me and some friends had ate mushrooms, and we didn't take them to have like a psychedelic breakthrough or anything. We were taking them to get fucked up.
Yeah.
And
it worked.
and it worked. and it worked.
Mission accomplished.
So, yeah.
Well,
It's-
I feel like that's a lot of those examples are reasons why maybe it should be legalized, because one, you kind of remove the mystery from it, so people aren't just doing it because, hey, it's you shouldn't be doing it. And second of all, I think you can teach people how to do it properly if it's accepted as something that's legal. So I think there would be less experiences like that where people just go fucking nuts because maybe they actually understand how to use it the right way. And if they want to be that way, they can, but you won't make that mistake if you don't.
Yeah, I think that's the argument for lowering the age on booze and legalizing all drugs too. Is pretty much that same.
Yeah, part of it. I mean, it has to be reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone at any age can drink now and do any drugs, but I think if you bring it into society in a moderate way, it will do more good than just having it be completely illegal all the time.
Well, and we covered some of this, by the way, in the last podcast where we talked about, the legalization of drugs or the decriminalization of drugs. We talked a little bit about the benefits of psychedelics and things like that. And so, we're going to get a firsthand account of, what your experience was on it. You went out in Colorado for two nights, right? And it was sort of a
Correct,
formal, you were with some shaman. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, did you get the sense that this was like a professional outfit, or was it sort of like some stranger in his mom's basement?
You find him through Craigslist? Or?
No, it was definitely like a word of mouth thing, and it was it is a quote unquote church, a traveling church, and some of that is, well, hell, I don't know. I couldn't really speak to like why they're organized as churches. Part of that is like the legal considerations. Part of it is I think they believe it is, a religious experience. This is something so I don't forget it later. Just to say, like the shaman was wonderful. The shaman was like this motherly figure who I actually called weeks later and even like revisited the experience. I wanted to talk to her about it. She was wonderful, but she also has led over 1,000 nights of sittings with the medicine, if you will, and that to me is mind-boggling.
Because they're on it too, right?
Yes, which was also one of the kind of themes of the second night of my experience was looking around, wondering who the voice of reason was, and realizing it was a house of 12 maniacs, and like the dogs probably were the most like neutral authority figures that night, and everybody had left this veil of reality, and it was a hell of a deal.
Well, so I'm going to talk really quickly. I just want to go over what DMT is, because some people listening have never even heard of DMT, or they haven't heard of ayahuasca. So I'm just going to really quickly run over some of this stuff, and we'll talk about kind of what it is and what it purportedly does, and then we'll move straight into your experience. But DMT is naturally occurring. It's actually created in the body. It's suspected that maybe the pineal gland creates it, because it also is involved in creating melatonin and tryptophan, which is essentially a very similar molecular form to DMT. DMT is actually the simplest form of the tryptamine psychedelics. And if you look actually at serotonin, molecularly, it's almost identical to DMT, which is interesting. And so, of course, DMT connects itself to the serotonin receptors as a result of that, and then that's how it ends up doing its thing. There's different versions of DMT, but the simplest form is, I think there might be 2 or 3 forms, in fact, that are naturally created. But in any case, it's found in the human body. It's found in a number of other animals and a bunch of other plants. So it's naturally occurring. It's not orally active, so you can smoke it, but you can't ingest it, because there's an enzyme inside you that will break it down immediately, and it has no effect. Whereas if you smoke it, it goes sort of straight to the brain, and then kind of works its way to the enzymes that break it down, which is why when you smoke DMT, it's like a 5 to 15 minute high, whereas when you use ayahuasca, which is a way to ingest it, it can last up to like 3 hours or so, and I'll be in 5 hours for you. Okay, so up to 5 hours apparently. So, but it lengthens the amount, because what happens is in ayahuasca, for example, ayahuasca is just where they've basically taken the bark of the ayahuasca vine, they've boiled it to get the DMT, and then they mix it with plants that they discovered by some miracle. Apparently, this process, with all the different plants in the Amazon, they don't know how this came about. And this was, the plants that they're using, where the ayahuasca vine is out of the Amazon, and they boil it, and then they mix it with these plants that have an enzyme inhibitor. So you take the DMT with the enzyme inhibitor, and the body no longer is able to break it down. And so as a result, when you drink this tea, now all of a sudden it can have its effect.
It's amazing they figured out how to do this.
It is really, it's incredible. And they were asked, how did you figure this out? And they were like, oh, well, we were told by, the goddess of, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And, this is an ancient practice. So, and they use it for healing, and they use it for religious purposes, spiritual things. They use it to try and determine what might be wrong with somebody, or to cure problems with them.
And 1/2 of the plant's shaped like the double helix. Like it coils and looks like
Oh, really?
a
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't even know that. That's actually kind of amazing. Yeah. So it links up with the serotonin receptors that are all throughout the body, really, including in the brain. And the brain being a particularly susceptible organ to these sort of changes, very, very sensitive organ. And there's a blood-brain barrier. This is kind of interesting, that typically tries to keep things out that are unwanted, and it lets DMT through like it's it is basically part of the body, right? So it lets it in as if it kind of wants to have it, which in fact it sort of does. In fact, one of the guys who did one of the few studies on it, sort of formal studies on it, suggested that the brain seemed to have some kind of hunger for it, which is quite an interesting way to put it. But he did a study. As this guy Rick Strassman. If any of you guys have seen the documentary DMT, The Spirit Molecule, they of course interview him, and they interview a lot of the people that he worked with there. That where he basically administered it intravenously into these patients, and then kind of, okay, well, what's going to happen? And of course, they all had these absolutely bonkers experiences, and psychedelic, it's hallucinogenic moments, and these super like out of this world life transformative things. I mean, the quotes that were coming out of these people were amazing, and but also hard to describe. That was one of the things that they pointed out, was that the things that they experienced, and I'll be interested, Stuart, to see how much of this is the case for you. The things that they were experiencing were extremely difficult to articulate. Exactly. There wasn't really much language for it. Things like synesthesia, where how do you describe feeling a color,
Tasting a color.
tasting a number, or something like that. There's another thing where he sort of I've got a bunch of stuff here that I'm going to skip over actually, but there were people who talk quite often. It actually comes up these like mechanical elven type or dwarven type. Like everybody has these little ideas of these little workers or elves or like spiritual creatures that kind of come around and help. They're like helper elves, kind of. You know what I mean? Like there's a bunch of people who sort of experience that. And
Some Doctor Who shit.
It is. It's.
Maybe they've all seen Doctor Who.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's
what's the common thread?
What is the common thread? Well, and that's the interesting thing is there was one of the ladies who was taking part of this, and she was like, I don't have much use for the word of God. The word God. I don't have much use for it. Doesn't really do much for me. But after taking ayahuasca, my ayahuasca experiences have convinced me that spirituality is a true thing, and that I'm now a spiritual person. There is a spiritual realm that I no longer think doesn't exist. And
I definitely had a similar experience.
you get a lot, you get a lot of that type of stuff, even with just psychedelics in general. And the profundity of these experiences is intense. And I wrote a bunch down, but I'm realizing that really what we ought to do is we ought to just turn the mic over to you. So
Dive in.
Do you have a bingo card with all the different things, and we can?
Yeah, we could. By the way, before we start, you were talking about how like the downsides could be bad. The short-term physical effects of taking DMT include the possibility of serotonin syndrome, which is a life-threatening condition caused by the excess of serotonin in the central nervous system, anxiety, delirium, vomiting and diarrhea, hypothermia, hyperactive reflexes, muscle rigidity, rapid heart rate, hypertension, increased body temperature, intense fear and panic, dilated pupils, which doesn't seem too bad to me, and lung irritation. It is extremely difficult to overdose when inhaling DMT. You need something like 91 times the regular dose, and it appears as though it's virtually impossible to overdose on it through injection, or not injection, but rather ingestion. Let's see. There's a large number of deaths that have been associated with DMT, but primarily, almost all of them, if not all of them, actually were found to be sort of a result of pre-existing conditions. So this could manifest like conditions that you have that have not manifested. This experience could manifest them. It's not considered addictive or toxic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it eliminates the potential for some sort of non-physical dependency behavior, which this becomes sort of the object for. So that's sort of my disclaimer, right? Like, don't run down and just try DMT or ayahuasca because you've been listening to Stuart's experience. Although, for having heard little bits and pieces of it, it sounds like maybe some of it might scare you off as much as it'll encourage you to try. But so, do you want to tell us where it was that you went?
Yeah, I guess I could just kind of set the background. I'd heard about it from a friend that this traveling church comes through town every now and then, and it'll be out at some old kind of hippie's farm, or out at a yurt, or at somebody's living room. And it's kind of funny when I think back on it. It was kind of like a slumber party of like a bunch of old women and a couple young explorers. It was about like 10, 12, 50 to 7-year-old women, kind of hippie types, looking for something interesting or have done it before. And then maybe 4 of us, kind of 30-somethings.
Did they charge?
Yeah, you kind of pay. I'm trying to think of what I paid. It was, you're paying kind of for the traveling churches, life expenses, and for It was something reasonable. It was like $100 a night or something for. Oh wow! I mean, yeah, something in that neighborhood.
Like all inclusive, $100 a night. You got a place to stay. They give you the ayahuasca, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay. The dogs will take care of you if you really freak out.
That's debatable.
Less so. Okay.
Yeah. So, they're like, bring a sleeping bag. We're gonna be in this living room, this woman's house. Kind of. Everyone kind of has like their sleeping pad, their sleeping bag, and like you've got like a headlamp, water. Everyone gets a bowl to throw up in, which is so.
So the lights are all out in the house. You do this at night.
Yeah, and there's like this anticipation all day, and there's this kind of, especially between your friends, there's some nerves. And
how many friends?
It was me and a guy and a girl that I'm good friends with, a couple, and the guy had done it before. The rest of us not. Anyway, when it comes down to it, the shaman is kind of in charge, and she was really this like maternal, super sweet, gentle, interesting character. And she was North American. She was just like a soccer mom. It was wild. And then her assistant, who will come into the story later, he looked like Viggo Mortensen. He works on a farm in Colorado. And he was just like stoic, brilliant, like wonderful, sweet guy.
I love Viggo.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I had a wild experience with him. So finally jumping into it, we kind of waited till about 9:00, and like 2 by 2, you kind of come up to this little altar on the floor in a living room, and there's like 2 plastic jugs of just this green, horrific kale shake looking thing.
Did you want to do this based on your friends, the experience that was going, or what was I feel like that's an important piece of like.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I was going for a journey. I treated it with some respect, and I mean, there was still some hesitation, like, I don't know, because they tell you beforehand. I should mention that there is like a long process leading up to it. For a week before, you don't eat meat. For the week before, you don't have any sexual release. For a week before, you're getting ready. Yeah, I mean, it's like a purification leading up to it. So you got to really take it seriously. Or I think you should. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, and furthermore, I mean, do they give you a goal? Do they give you a purpose, something that you're trying to achieve, or is it just, hey, let the thing take you wherever it takes you?
I think people do both. I think the first night I was like, I'm ready to go wherever. The second night I came in with an intention, and that got blown out of the water immediately. Like, who cares? Yeah. In fact, I think the second night was challenging because I had this intention. I think part of the lesson was you have no, like, look, tiny human, don't even bring your intention here. That's ridiculous.
What was your mindset going into it? Like, were you skeptical? What did you think? What were your expectations?
I was amused at the setting and the kind of, a bunch of grown-ups in their pajamas, like 14 people in a room, like with their sleeping bags, and I was very curious. It feels like you're going into a surgery or something. You're like, wow, I hope this goes well. I guess I'll wake up later. And
the preparation sounds kind of like it. It sounds like you're preparing to go into surgery.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is a spiritual surgery, and it can, yeah. There was a ritualistic aspect of going up in a pair, and there was this nice woman that I went up with, and we prepared up for the second night as well to go sit kind of like on our knees and kind of take the medicine. And I forget what we said or did, or you kind of take it. And some people always talk about like the taste. I didn't mind it. It tastes like you're drinking dirt. It's really, really strong. Some people are immediately gagging. But you just take, and they kind of ask you like, how strong do you want this to be? And I think most of us just said, give us the standard operating dose.
How much of it did you have to drink? Like a shot, or?
Yeah, it was about 2 ounces maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, a large, healthy, gross dirt kale shot. And then you kind of go back to your little sleeping bag, and we kind of all just laid there in the dark. And like earlier when I said 5 hours, my immediate thought was like, well, I should qualify that like that's also irrelevant. It could be 3, 4, 5 hours. You don't experience it like that.
Weeks.
Yeah, you do not experience it at all like that. yeah, and then for both nights, you're kind of up all night.
How long did it take to get in your system? Or did you?
It's obviously not like smoking DMT, which I've not done, but it's a kind of slow roll up over the first probably 20 minutes or so. It's not immediate. You kind of start to feel the. Actually, I think I just reread the kind of journal that I wrote about it. That I started to kind of feel like I was riding a big hairy snake, and some of this is going to sound absolutely mad, but
Good.
I felt like I was riding on the back of just like this big hairy snake and holding on, and I was loving it. It felt incredible. So, and if I skip over some, like I just reread my journal like once today, but if there's stuff I leave out,
So it
remind me.
keeps you in the kind of like dream mode?
Yeah, but a weird, lucid, dreamy, kind of controlled way, and it definitely rolls up and then kind of plateaus, and then you kind of roll back down the mountain. And both nights, I was able to kind of travel. I was able to kind of steer things at various moments. Where on the first night, at first, I think one of the first things sensations I had was the ability to travel around my childhood neighborhood. I felt like I could just fly through the streets. It was like a lucid dream. I was just flying around my streets as a kid, and I was like enjoying the hell out of it. And then I could jump. I think the idea of the near-death experience, when you die, that your pineal gland or what have you just like squeezes like a sponge and dumps DMT in your body, and your life flashes before your eyes. I think that's kind of the origins of this, and that's what I was experiencing. Is there was no longer any limitations of reaching into like the library of memories, and I could experience them vividly. I could go to like a night on vacation with an old girlfriend, and it was just, you're there. And actually, unusually, there was a moment where I was laying in this bed, and I was like my father in his first marriage, like laying next to his first wife, and like I was just living that for a couple minutes, and I was conscious of myself, and I was like, wow, this is what it was like for him. It was crazy.
Are your eyes closed? I mean, are you looking around and seeing the room as you were imagining it? I mean,
normally you're in the dark, eyes are closed, and at times you're seeing things. Like for me, a really funny moment the first night for me was getting up to go pee, and that was like, it is weird. It's like you're still dreaming, but you're kind of fighting it. Like you're swimming up the stream and trying to control my body to get to this bathroom and pee while the walls are kind of melting, and like, I mean, and yeah, you do see like the weird kind of snake-like things just streaming across your vision. But that was a hilarious little chapter that I took on as a challenge, and it kind of had fun with the first night. The second night was similar, trying to go to the bathroom, and it was god awful. But we'll get to that.
Are you talking like are other people talking around you when you're doing this?
I should mention, yeah, some of that happened the first night where the second night. There's definitely some talking where I talked to Ed, the Viggo Mortensen shaman, and I talked to the female that was leading it. I talked to her briefly because I had to get out of the room. Like there's these things called ikros, and it's a song, it's a chant, and it's like there's some drumming and there's some chanting, and it's very hypnotic, and it works with the music, and the music works like with the medicine, and it intensifies things like I can't even explain to you. Like if you're starting to see like kind of snake-like tracers or what have you, that kind of starts to like vibrate and like with the rhythm, and that starts to kind of intensify, and the colors intensify, or whatever you're experiencing just ratchets up in a way that, for me, the second night, and then there's a woman in the middle of the room shaking dry leaves, and I saw a huge tree in the middle of the room, in the living room, and the second night, I had to excuse myself because it was unbelievably uncomfortable.
Were there any shared experiences that you talked to people in the room later, like, oh, we all saw the same tree in the middle or something like that?
No, I remember so much of what happened to me both nights, and I'm so confused and blown away that nobody else was able to articulate their experiences. Then you kind of have like a breakdown the next day. We're all kind of in pajamas making a big breakfast of like fruit and coffee, and we kind of go around and everybody kind of shares their experiences. And but yeah, most people really didn't have much to say, which was really frustrating to me.
Do you normally remember your dreams?
Good enough. Yeah. But this was like, yeah, I can like articulate, 4 hours of both nights almost, like, and which is great. I'm thankful for that. But
How'd you get off that hairy snake?
you just transition. It's kind of like watching a weird psychedelic music video or something. You kind of just, one moment you're riding the snake, and the next moment you're just a jaguar laying there, like looking at your paws and licking the back of your hands, and like it's just kind of transitions. Or you realize that you can go through any memory at any point and kind of feel it and be it and live it. And then sometimes I could even like feel the transitions. The first night I was laying there and things just got so black. I was in this void, and I kind of sensed that this was the peak. And yeah, it's like a weird, it transitions inexplicably. And sometimes you can try to fight against it maybe. But yeah, you're kind of just along for the ride. And the first night was beautiful.
Was it trying to teach you something? Like,
Yeah, I think the first night, there was one experience where I had a vision of younger versions of myself all trying to man like a big Viking ship or something, where you see normally like a bunch of guys on the oars and guys manning the sails, and then the idea of yourself as an evolving process, and the idea of yourself eventually becoming fully evolved, like the end of the road version of yourself. I had this vision of that version of myself kind of coming down and addressing all the other versions of myself of different ages, of now, of last week, of 5 years old, and basically saying like, you guys are working way too hard on this. Like, why don't you let me steer the ship for a while? And that was really profound. That was like, to make a link between yourself as a child and as a teenager and as an adult and as a whatever post-adult, as a kind of post, I don't know, life and death maybe, this kind of godlike version of yourself. And that was a hell of a deal. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that was, yeah.
Well, did you have an experience aside from like? Did you sense that the more adult you or the post-adult you or whatever was a different entity, or was it you? And if it was you and not a different entity, did you have any experience where you felt like you were dealing with another sort of supernatural entity, intelligent, conscious being of any sort?
Yeah, I know that's a recurring
Right,
thing.
that's why I ask, yeah.
People, I think even Graham Hancock had an experience one night where he's like, I am dealing with a really dark, mean trickster, some entity that has given me some real hell, and this is not terribly fun.
Yeah.
I never felt like I was interacting with a third party. Perhaps the second night I could have felt like, well, the medicine or something, as high as I soared the first night is sending me to the deepest, darkest pits tonight, and that's just kind of what I'm in for. And but again, like I didn't feel like I was interacting with any kind of other.
Do you think that what you experienced could be pieced together with what was already sort of in your brain and your subconscious? The way sometimes we dream about things, and the people we interact with can sometimes make us laugh, and we don't, like they're unexpected, or you can hear music you've never heard before that your subconscious seems to have created. Do you get the sense that your brain could have pieced this all together? Or is it possible, because some people describe this as consciousness as sort of an antenna that takes stuff in, and that your brain normally filters all this crap out, and that DMT actually takes that filter away, and now you're receiving higher level stuff, sort of potentially supernatural things, or not necessarily even supernatural, right? But just additional data that's coming in. Is that what you felt like you were experiencing, or is it just something that your brain shaped?
The way that I've possibly interpreted it is that in the way that, we can only see a certain piece of like the wavelengths of light that we can see. We can only see within a certain band there. I would maybe assume that there's wavelengths of experience that we're limited to here, and perhaps the medicine breaks those down. Perhaps the medicine allows you to kind of experience wavelengths above and below what we see, what we feel, where we can go, like within our body. And perhaps, yeah, maybe in the same way that the MAO inhibitor enables your body to kind of let the medicine go through the gates. Perhaps the medicine opens these gates for you to kind of to travel and to experience all this. I don't know. Yeah, and I don't know if it makes me believe in a God or what kind, or some sort of one source of creation. It certainly makes me believe that there's a lot out there to access. And yeah, and going to those places, you can be very raw and very exposed. Something I should mention too is that going into this, as long as like with the eating and the other things to prepare, they say like, all right, do you have any kind of history of psychosis, or are you like fit of like mind and body? And I think everybody, when they ask themselves that, there's probably some like lingering like, I don't like that. Yeah, I guess. I think I'm fit enough. Like, mentally.
I don't think anyone thinks they're 100% sane.
Yeah, and so like maybe that 1%, you're like, well, I mean, I guess.
Psychos.
Right,
Oh my
right, that's
God.
true.
And I heard an interesting quote earlier today when I was thinking about this. They were kind of, and a guy said, well, with ayahuasca, like the set and the setting, which is a kind of, for any drug experience, like the set and the setting is so important. And that could be like the people around you or where you are. And so the set and the setting was a little bit weird. I'm in pajamas with a bunch of like hippies in a living room in Colorado, and I didn't know most of them. But what he said is that the set and the setting for an ayahuasca experience is your internal goings on. Like that is where it happens. It's like you take this and you're gonna corkscrew into your navel and into your history and into your inner being. And yeah, I think if you're honest with yourself, you have to say going into it like, well, I hope I'm good to go. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the whole house of cards just falls apart. And I think that's what some people experience. And that's why I think some people experience something quote unquote challenging and don't ever want to do it again. So like this, no, I like staying within the comfortable bands of my reality where I'm steering this ship with my body. I don't like being detached from it and being thrown into a pit of snakes and not knowing how to get out of it.
It kind of sounds like the sunken place from Get Out a little bit. At least
Yeah.
The bad night, maybe, or the intense night.
Yeah, the sunken place. I mean, I literally felt like I was in a sunken place. I felt like I was in a cave. That's how it started the second night, is that the music started, and I felt like I was in a cave, and like the distance from where I was to the entrance was just growing, and there were so many snakes across my like field of vision. And like,
Do you not like snakes? Is that?
I've been pretty neutral my whole life on snakes. They're fine by me. No,
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like, oh, I'm scared of snakes. It was more of a claustrophobia of like, snakes are fine, but like 300 snakes, like 3 inches from your face is not ideal.
Yeah.
Were there other people that had kind of the same experience of having one just awesome night where you kind of controlled everything, did whatever you wanted, then fighting the snakes the next? Like, is that a pretty normal thing?
My friend, the 30-something girl, she actually didn't partake the second night because she had a relatively good experience and was like, I don't want to play Russian roulette twice. Like, I'm gonna sit the next night out. And then of course she felt entirely justified. And I was like, look, let me tell you, they would have been driving both of us to the mental ward if maybe if you did the second night.
Did you feel like you were in control the first night?
I mean, there was nothing threatening. There was nothing.
Could you control it? I mean, or were you just along for the ride?
Mostly along for the ride. I mean, I could control it in the kind of lucid dreaming type bits where I'm like the choose your own adventure parts. That was quite fun. Or I remember like in the latter half, like after the kind of the crescendo of the first night where I was laying there and it was just the black abyss, and I kept thinking of Voltron because I was like a bunch of different colorful cats coming together to form myself, and having like kind of, you have these moments of like levity or in these moments of like self-awareness, you're like, holy hell, Voltron, and then you kind of go back into this like Egyptian black weird thing. But like coming on the backside, I could kind of try to steer things a little bit. Like when I was kind of turning into different animals. I was laying there and I was a jungle cat, and then I was turned into like a giant big bird, which was wild because I looked at a bunch of ayahuasca art the next day that this lady had at her house, and there was plenty of art of people turning into giant birds. Like it was a man, and in the next picture he's got big wings, and I'd never seen this art before, and I totally experienced that. Like how does this guy from whatever 30 years ago in Peru have the same experience that I did? just because of the medicine. I have no idea.
Have you tried to interpret that, or did the shaman give you any insight into that?
Yeah, well, I think there's like what I've researched on is that there's archetypes of the jaguar and like the condor, and one is like the ego, one is the super ego, and they're about different depths of self. But who knows? I don't know. It was cool being a jaguar though. That was really cool.
So one of the guys in this last thing that Brent ran, Ian puts people through a meditation, and he was a jaguar. And
Really?
yeah, so there may be a common thing that humanity's connected to or something.
Like an animal brain type thing, like something deep seated from when we were still hunting and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, I wanted to be a snow leopard because it was Colorado. I thought that would be a lot more
Were there
apropos.
were there any things that you found strangely familiar? Places or feelings that you recognize that you don't know why or how you felt that way, or memories that you had that couldn't possibly be yours but that felt like they were yours, or anything like that? Pour that wine as carefully as humanly possible, Calvin.
Calvin's taking a piss. Okay.
I don't know. I think it does. Yeah, it does raise questions of when you're experiencing it and you're traveling through your memories of, like, maybe we lived this life and we've, and you can kind of circle back to different chapters and we just kind of experience it over and over again, but you never get to bring the memory along with you. I think with the ayahuasca, you kind of start to feel like, yeah, it's this library of memories, and maybe we're experiencing it in a linear way, but perhaps it's just like this hard drive, and we're kind of just like cruising through it every day. But maybe, again, like the experience of time isn't linear, or what is, isn't linear. It's just like maybe it's a field of experiences, and you can hop around through your dreams, or you can hop around when, some series of chemicals and electrical business is going on, and all of a sudden you're no longer restricted.
So Ian said it was more real than real life, what he went through when he did it.
Huh.
That more real than anything he'd ever experienced. Was it?
I'd be curious to hear him elaborate on that. To me, it felt more like, I don't know if it was more, I don't know if I would say it felt more real. I think it felt more, if you're saying like, well, via ayahuasca, the DMT allows you to step away from like the computer that you're running this life on, and you can step back and take a look from, bird's eye view. Perhaps, maybe that's what he means, that you zoom out a level from what we're experiencing. I don't know, but it didn't, and there's feelings and there's visuals that are kind of hyper real in their intensity.
How much of those visions are mental, and how many of those visions are literally overlaid on what you're? And I mean, I'm so curious because I don't understand. Are your eyes closed for the bulk of this, or when you open your eyes, are you in a different place, or do you see things like overlaid on what you're actually seeing, or I'm confused on how this works.
Both, yeah.
Okay,
it's both. Like I've never, in my experiences with like other psychedelics, I don't get as much of like, the universe is turning fractal, the trees are melting. I've had a little bit of that, but that's, I guess, not where my mind and body goes. But this was by far the strongest and farthest I've ever gone. And probably like, I think DMT or ayahuasca is definitely like drinking from the fire hose of any drug experience. I think that's the end of the road, unless we're talking about like, some sort of Russian thing that turns into a crocodile or something. I don't know. But I can't imagine a crazier experience. Like, it is the most reality-shattering experience, actually.
Do you think there's a purpose to it? And I mean, like,
I think it's a hack. I think it's a reality hack. I think the code that this is all running on gets completely short-circuited with this. In a way, it doesn't totally break down. Actually, so to start talking about the second night, it was horrific and terrible. I was thinking on the way over here that if you've ever been around an engine that gets stuck with the throttle all the way open, and like the noise and it's really, really unnerving. That's what was going on in my brain. And like, I found myself in the kitchen at one point, and I almost couldn't get anything done because there's 1,000 images and 1,000 thoughts a second, so fast. And it's like, and you're fighting this, and it kind of comes in waves too, where and another woman actually did say this the next morning. She's like, wow, last night was tough. I felt like I was just being dunked underwater. Like you see in a movie, a guy getting like the mob's dunking his Lebowski's head in the toilet, and like you feel like that mentally and spiritually, and there's just no escape.
Was it that way in the very beginning on night 2? Like how did night 2 start, and then what was the progression, and how did it end? What was the story to night 2?
It started out with, I think, a little bit more of the like, oh, I'm starting to dream, I can control it, and this is fun. And then there was a feedback loop that once the music started, the chanting and the drums and the rustling of leaves, and I started to sink into like this cave covered in snakes, and this major claustrophobia setting in. And the feedback loop started of like, oh, this is going bad. I hope it doesn't get bad. And now it's like, oh, it's getting worse. It's that target fixation, like where you're on a bike, and if you start looking at a tree, you're gonna like drift towards that tree. Like that is exactly what happened for me. And I think there was a moment, way down the line where I was so exhausted, like mentally and spiritually, and what have you, where, and maybe this is what other people talk about with the drug experience, that you have to lose your ego, or your ego has to die. But there was a moment where I was like, I'm just so sick of fighting this. I'm so sick of hanging on to this tree while like all this like garbage like blows by me, that I'm just gonna let go and I'll just die. And that's fine. And that was the beginning of the end. That's when I finally there was a couple more kind of like sessions where I had to get dunked back down into hell. But when I finally was like, all right, I'll loosen my grip on this reality, and fine, do your worst. Like, fuck you.
were you scared that like during your experience that you weren't gonna come back to like reality? Was that like part of the anxiety of it?
Yeah. I think that crosses my mind in every strange trip. Is like, what if I never come back?
Right.
This is my new reality. From now on, I'm gonna be the guy that they're like, he used to be able to get things done. Now he's just playing a flute on the street, and
or an office space hypnotized while you go to work scenario.
Oh my god!
You just can't ever snap out of it.
Yeah. So yeah, that crosses your mind. But a very real experience that second night was like, I want to hit the eject seat. I'm ready for this to be over. Like, can I make a pot of coffee and snap out of this? It's like, no, no, you cannot. Like,
did it seem like it went on for 10 hours, days? Like, what's the? I know you said time kind of doesn't apply.
Yeah, it's.
Did it feel longer than the first night?
For sure, yeah. Because I think there were still, for me, like multiple chapters of the night to kind of go through. And towards the second night, the end, like the kind of latter, 20% of it was quite nice. It was very like this euphoric. I was in my sleeping bag. I'd crawled down to this room downstairs, and I was in a sleeping bag. And that was another time where I could travel through time, and I could go to anywhere when I was in a sleeping bag in my life, whether it was like camping or being on a friend's floor as a child and just like chatting about comic books. Like, it was so fun. It was really nice. But I was also just exhausted. I was fried. I was fried for days after that, actually. I went and bought groceries the next day, and I bought like Cinnamon Toast Crunch and a bunch of ice cream. I was a child. Like, I just was a total child. Yeah. In fact, I don't think I wrote the journal until Thursday of everything that happened, but I could remember all of it vividly.
Did the people help you while you were having the bad trip, or were they?
Yeah, it was kind of, I knew I had to get out of that room, like the main room. Actually, I committed like a real faux pas in the midst of all this. I haven't mentioned, by the way, that both nights there's people throwing up all around you, which is really distracting and really unnerving. And
into bowls, like they're throwing up into bowls,
like into a bowl just next to them, next to you, next to each other. There's people just like.
Did anyone shit themselves?
I think most people made it to the bathroom. I didn't. What are they? They call it.
You didn't make it to the bathroom in time.
No, I didn't throw up either night, which I think, the first night I was like, oh, that was great. I just had to pee. That was it. But I was glad that I didn't purge. And then maybe the second night, after it was all over, I was like, maybe I shouldn't be fighting this thing, like fighting it on multiple fronts. Maybe I should just barf. Who cares? Like, because you get a real nausea. I mean, I could fight it off, but man, you want to barf. It's and that's when you start questioning, like, what poison did I just put in my body? Like, and who's in charge here? A bunch of crazy, like, people wearing, like, yeah, anyway.
Are you glad you did it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad I did it. I think that it's broadened my horizon of what's possible to experience. I think, like something you said in the beginning, that when you said, like, are you guys, I think most everyone here is pro-psychedelic. I think I would also come at it from a different angle and say, I would imagine most of us here are pro-autonomy and independence of our brains and bodies and of our experiences. We don't like an idea of some outside force or some sort of glorified student council saying, no, you're not allowed to go to these places in your mind.
Right.
And it's like, no, like this is my life. This is like, it's up, once you're an adult, I'll decide if I want to play this Russian roulette, and I'll be responsible for wherever it takes me. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for doing it. I don't know if I'd ever do it again, because, I wouldn't say that with certainty. I could do it again. We'll see.
If you had to redo exactly what you already did in order to have had the experience at all, right? So either it's erased completely from your experiences, or you have to redo it, let's say this weekend, to get it. Would you do it again so that you definitely had it?
Will you repeat the question, Sean?
Let's say that the experience is going to be wiped from your brain entirely.
Okay.
And in order to get it back, you have to relive it exactly as you lived it.
No, I would never. No, there's so much that I treasure about that, because it is the farthest I've journeyed outside of this reality. And if these rituals and these medicines have been done in the past as a preparation for death, then, which is something I've thought about, is that maybe this is how we get to kind of sample what it's like to kind of break through, so that when it happens, all right, I can handle myself. I've been here before. I know what it's like to all of a sudden find yourself in an abyss, and I can kind of float myself towards the light or away from the light, or whichever is up to you. I have a great appreciation for, the mystery that's out there. Like it's, say you do die and some third party is trying to usher you somewhere. Well, how do you trust that third party after having an experience like this? Or, I think it is preparing you to kind of handle it and trust yourself in those spaces. Like actually our friend Brent, I remember after talking to him kind of when I was processing all this, I told him, in the wake of this, I want to be able to trust myself outside of my physical body. Like whatever me that is in there, I want to trust that outside of, as a kind of non-physical entity just floating in the software, which is a crazy thing to think about. But when you go there for the first time, I guess maybe the first time there was like a ignorant bliss and it was fun and it was all rosy, but then, I don't know.
Which memory do you cherish more, the blissful night or the snake pit night?
I definitely value the second. I don't know if I'd value one. I mean, I do think of it like on a continuum that I got to go. So perhaps if I don't do it again, it's great. I went all the way to the left and all the way to the right, or all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom. But I value them both for what they were. The second night definitely has made me just tougher as an individual. Like I've had mushroom experiences where, if it gets challenging, I can just really just carry on mentally or physically. If I'm on a hike or something, it's just like, oh my God, this is nothing. this I can handle. Like I've been waterboarded by the stupid DMT elves, so this is fine. Like, so yeah, so that, or I mean, just any kind of challenge in life. It's like, wow, I've, faced a unique type of adversity.
Yeah, if your reality almost collapsed, like shit at work seems kind of trivial.
Yeah.
In comparison.
Yeah, or if you're on a long hike, you're like, well, this is just like a physical long hike, and I'm sunburned, or it's raining, or I'm out of food. It's like I can keep grinding. Like just lowering your head and grinding out is at least I'm like mentally intact. Like when you lose your mind, you could appreciate coming back to to having it.
Were there any fundamental life decisions that you thought about differently? I don't view work the same, or gosh, I was working too hard, or I was not spending enough time doing this or that, or anything like that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I didn't come away with it thinking
Yeah.
like I've got to. The second night, I did have a couple visions of strange shapes that I still want to manifest in the real world. I saw these shapes and these combinations of shapes and these combinations of colors that for me were strangely nostalgic, and that were like these weird little tokens of my life. And they're just really simple and like almost two-dimensional and just basic colors, but the way that they were combined, and I can still see them right now, but if like they're these just little like tokens of my life, of like in each one of a different combination of colors represented something totally different. Does that sound insane? What did I just say?
It sounds totally insane, but it makes sense on a level. It makes sense on a psychedelic level.
Yeah. Well, now I need to
Yeah.
I do need to manifest it so I can show you, and then you can still say, well, that doesn't mean anything else. but great. Glad those little squares mean something to you.
No, but
Was
it's
there like
fascinating.
sorry, John.
Yeah.
Was there a catalyst that made you say, yeah, I'm definitely gonna do ayahuasca, or was it you heard about the church and you're kind of a seeker and you were down to do something different, or was there an event beforehand that you think steered you toward?
Or did you lose a bet?
Yeah, I didn't go under any kind of guilt or obligation. I did feel like the universe presented me like, I mean, you can travel to Peru and sweat and get diarrhea and be miserable in the jungle and not be able to escape. I literally the next day, I mean, I could just walk across town to my home and bed. And like,
Yeah.
it was in my town, downtown, at a woman's house. I mean, it came to me. And so
Yeah.
I could not say no. I had to do it. I mean, it was the universe. And I'd read about it or heard about it on podcasts, and it was such a layup to kind of to do that I couldn't not do it. And I still get offered, like, I mean, I'm on their email list, and I still get offers from friends to partake. And I have friends that want to do it twice a year. But like, you know, there's a great quote, and it might be Alan Watts, but he says, you know, like when you go up on the mountain, like if you get the message, then you need to come back down the mountain. Like, you don't need to keep going up the mountain, or you certainly don't need to stay up there. And that's kind of how I see it right now. Is that like I can ride on that experience for a couple years. I can't imagine doing it 1,000 times. Or one of the kind of second in command, he said he was more around 100 times. Or, I mean, it is. Yeah.
But
they're different people.
These people seem totally normal, like outside of this. So, like, they could take something that powerful 1,000 times and not completely lose their mind. It's pretty
Seemingly,
interesting, I think.
yeah. No, I mean, they were wonderful people, like really lovely. You know, just like somebody you'd see at a PTA meeting, and I mean, I know that you go to a lot of
I
PTA
do.
meetings, but
It's my favorite.
they just seemed so normal and so. I mean, yeah, but there might be moments where I probably looked at him with a kind of sideways glance of
Yeah.
like, "You're absolutely insane. Like, what? This is what you've chosen to do with your life? Holy hell!"
Did you have any like past life stuff or any feelings of reincarnation? Or Ian had a bunch of that going on. You were your dad for a little bit.
Yeah, that was odd, and I felt a weird empathy for all, and a weird connection with my family. I don't think about, you know, every family's different, and some people every day they're, you know, thinking about where they are within the family, and my family's more kind of independent. We're all kind of, you know, it's very laissez-faire, and everyone's got their mission to do, and you know, support each other. But I don't feel any kind of like I need to do this for my family or what have you. But I felt a weird, yeah. There was plenty of moments where you think like, wow, I'm a combination of these two people. And then normally there's just people that you kind of, you know, I don't know how to articulate that. Yeah, there's
I'm
moments
having
here.
like a grandpa in my deep tissue massage stuff. I've always had real trouble breathing, and
Yeah.
so when she's getting into those areas, I'm having like a grandpa and a great grandpa both come up. One who had
Whoa.
like thyroid cancer, and then another one who he got like gassed in World War I as a medic or something.
Holy cow.
And I've never been able to breathe all my life, so they're like popping into my head,
Wow,
like helping, like we're getting through it together. It's crazy. So
that's wild.
it's interesting that's.
I think there is like a kind of vertical string that runs through wherever we come from. And yeah, and I think that maybe what you're experiencing, and maybe some of what I was experiencing, is that you can kind of climb up that a bit, or you kind of get sent up it. Yeah, I don't know. But
I don't know if me working this stuff out is helping them in some way, if like depending on how time connects with itself, or it's just if it's a linear thing and it's just letting me release that. But it does feel like it's just been kind of handed off down the family. Here's my relay stick to deal with.
It's interesting that you're accessing that through massage.
Yeah.
She's the real deal.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's something in the notion that
Yeah.
that the reality is very different from what we experience. The brain has its own
She's
filters,
banned.
and those filters can be unleashed. Can be taken away in different fashions to let in different information, and that they talk about the possibility of being able to have psychedelic type experiences through fasting or through meditation and things like that. It doesn't surprise me at all that deep tissue massage could potentially tap into some of that same stuff, and it makes you. I can understand the concerns about having something as strong as DMT completely. I mean, being, as you sort of said, the strongest. Like, this is the end of the road, right? This is everything all at once, and it's hard to sort of handle it all. And so I could see there being real benefit to, and in fact, they talk at length about in some of these studies how they've sort of demonstrated that if people are given too much before they really even know what they're getting into, that the results are really bad.
Yeah.
And so you can see that there could be some benefit to sort of working your way up to these experiences, and so that you can understand them better, and that you can piece them together better, and you can kind of maybe maneuver around them better and understand what you're actually trying to accomplish, or what's going on, maybe, or see parallels, right? That things won't shock you as much if it's just, if you didn't take any drugs in your life and then you just go like take a double dose of ayahuasca, I'm sure it's going to be not helpful, right? Like counterproductive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think like what you were saying, like the motor with the throttle wide open. I think that sounds like that's kind of what happens.
Yeah. Well,
and work your way up properly. I mean, that might not have been the case for you, but
well, to your point earlier, if it was legalized or available in a controlled way, maybe there are four different doses, and you like, look, this is a controlled kindergarten dose, and everybody needs to start with that.
Right.
Or this is a controlled, to mix metaphors, you second gear, third gear, like, because just with and I would never argue for more like regulation or control, but at least the ability to kind of explore it and investigate it without kind of fear of being locked up. Because I did talk to some therapist recently, or someone just kind of casually in a social situation, and this came up, and she's like, "Oh yeah, no, I know people that have been put into a mental ward. This drug, it needs to be understood better. It needs to be respected better. Like it will shatter somebody that's not strong enough."
Well, I feel like we're house cats basically, and that the sober world is our house, and you spend all of your time in the house, and unless a human lets you outside to see the outside world, you assume that this is reality. But if a human just lets you go outside and you just run around and you have no clue what you're looking at, you freak out and you get lost and then you die. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, where it's like, okay, well, let's let the cat let the cat look. Not today, kitty. Let's let the cat look through the window, and then let's let the cat out for in my hands for 5 minutes, and let's get, you know what I mean? I don't know, just. Yeah. But at the same time, though, it makes sense. If you really want to know the nature of reality, you got to get outside. You got to see what's actually out there. And it seems to me that maybe that's sort of what's going on here, is that everybody is so used to saying that this is reality. This house that we live in is reality, and everything else is just a distortion. Oh, your brain's all messed up, right? Yeah. But what if at the outside, what if all the stuff we're taking in when we've got these drugs is just a broader, grander sense of what is really real? You can make it through your whole house. Cat can live its whole life in the house, but I mean, if it really wants to understand the nature of reality, which most cats don't, but in this case, let's assume
it's a shame that they're not more
it's a pity,
curious.
Really, truly.
Well, I think that's true, but I think the counter to that point is maybe that it does open up a different world, but also you can't really function well as a human when you're in that state. Like, you need somebody there watching you. So it's a view outside, but you're not supposed to live there.
Well, but what do you mean by supposed, right? Like, what do you mean?
Well, because like you would, if you were just constantly in that state, then you would probably die.
Yeah, okay, so
It's like you wouldn't be able to take care of yourself, or something would happen.
right, but I mean, I don't have to constantly live in that state. The question is there value to my going there?
Right,
And,
right.
and for that matter, is there value to could there be value to never experiencing? And I guess that's the question I have is, what is the purpose of this? I'm not saying that any of us has the answer necessarily, and that's part of the reason why I ask you about some of the benefits. It's clear that some people experience benefits from these experiences, but it does kind of beg the question of what really is reality? Do we have any business trying to figure out what it is? And if so, are we doing a woefully poor job of doing it? And ought we maybe to explore drugs not just on an experimental level, but on a scientific level even, to figure out, hey, how do these things operate, and what is it teaching us about the world that we don't really understand?
Yeah. Well, so to go back to the levels of vibration and levels of, the limits and the borders of like what we are able to experience and what we're able to see, and perhaps, what if this medicine can broaden those horizons? And so the question is like, when people encounter these little elves, or people encounter like a sinister little trickster there, is that an objective third party? And that raises a lot of other questions. And then and if that's like an objective kind of parallel reality, I mean, I was just thinking like, well, what if when those things come into our space, what if like for us kind of like jumping over the fence and we're kind of poking around there and they can terrorize us or play with us? And I'm going to take this to a weird place, but there is a theory that is the kind of, when we see a UFO or a ghost or whatever, it's not coming from, it's not somebody flying from Mars. It's somebody all of a sudden kind of jumping over the fence of, I mean, they're here, but there's just entering into a different kind of a visible part of a reality, whereas, kind of retreat to a wild thing to think about.
I think there's a lot of talk, or there's theories about multiple parallel universes, but they all kind of live with slightly different rules and exist on slightly different planes. And the one way that I've heard it described is like take a loaf of bread and then you have slices, so they're right next to each other, but you can't cross from one slice of bread to the other one. But maybe you can kind of push against it and you can see the echoes of that or something.
Although if the assumption, as I understand it, is that each parallel universe closest to you is also most similar to you, then you wouldn't expect necessarily to make the closest leap and all of a sudden you're dealing with machine elves or anything like that. No, but
well, that's perhaps the medicine's the weird shortcut that kind of
like a worm, like almost like a wormhole of parallels of parallel universes. Well, that's an interesting.
And is it a two-way street? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But so you felt like the elves or whatever they were, that they weren't a manifestation of something inside you. You felt like they were very specifically a third party that wasn't based on you.
I didn't really encounter a third party. I just encountered I think I was just exploring myself both nights. Yeah, which. Yeah, maybe I should try again. Go try to
meet someone new.
Yeah. Well, there's the theory, of course, about the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of man, and this idea of the human brain increasing, doubling in size over 2 million years or whatever it is, and the theory goes basically that we experimented with psychedelics and from mushrooms to DMT to you name it, and that this caused us to essentially start to evolve. Do you think that there's any the theory then continues and basically suggests that this is our new method of potentially evolving as a human race, is that if we really utilize this tool and begin to understand it and begin to understand what it can do to and for our minds and for our consciousness, because if you don't think of consciousness necessarily as binary, right? If you think of it as something that can expand and contract and can exist on multiple levels, and that we could, in theory, evolve through, sort of, or alter or increase or whatever our evolution through the use of these drugs. Does that speak to you at all? Does that, based on your experience, does that sound like something?
I think it's possible for sure. Yeah, there's this thing, I want to look it up on my phone right now, but there's this thing called the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is quite nice too. That's in West Austin. But the Schumann resonance is, I don't know how the hell they take this measurement, but in theory, it's like this measurement of the level that humans are vibrating at right now. And then people recently have been like, oh, the Schumann resonance, it's spiking. Like there's a great awakening going on. This is, it started out with a bunch of bros on a podcast talking about these psychedelics, but what we're seeing is like the tide is rising amongst all of humans. We're able to connect now. We're just in the last 20 years, we can connect online and we can share these experiences. And this is the next turning point in evolution, is our kind of, we're vibrating at a higher rate, and it's going to be, no more 1990s caveman. We're going like 2020 enlightened Coachella people. I don't know. I don't know where the hell we're going, but sure, I think that's a possibility. Great, bring it on.
I have a question. So the first night there was no music, and the second night there was music.
No, there's always music.
Oh, okay.
The first night, it was really wonderful. There's people that have these experiences, and they get these Icaros on CD. There's just like these different beautiful chants, and you might hear them independently and think they're beautiful. And I'd be curious to hear some now, actually, and see how I reacted to it. But they can be really wonderful and drive this kind of dreamlike experience, or they can be terrible, like a pounding of a hammer on your head. And actually, that night that I was struggling, I kind of mentioned to the shaman, I was like, wow, this is, or I started to mention this earlier, like the faux pas was, I kind of sat up and I was like, without even thinking, I was like, hey, can we go to the next song? Because this is like, I'm driving a nail.
Hey Siri, skip this song, please.
Yeah, and she was like, I could tell she was like, what are you doing?
Siri actually answered you. That's pretty great.
He's like, no.
But anyway, the shaman's response, like in the midst of like the drumming and the dancing and everyone's kind of having their barfing and everything, their experience, she's like, guys, whenever one time in the jungle, I crawled up to my master, my shaman, and he was playing the song on the drums. It was haunting me. And I was like, you have to stop. You have to. And all he would do was just beat the drums harder and louder and didn't let me off the hook. And that's just the way it is. I was like, no, I'm out of here. Where's my headlamp? Where's
Not
my
the
water?
right answer.
Yeah, I'm going to crawl through the living room, encounter the dogs, and try to go down the spiral staircase, but mostly just lay in the kitchen for a while. Yeah, it's a crazy deal.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah,
That's nuts.
so.
How did it compare to mushrooms?
In high doses, like high dose mushrooms.
What's the highest dose of mushrooms you've done too?
Probably
we can
not
call it a high dose?
crazy high. I think after that experience, I've experienced. My take on drugs is that it's better to err on the light side, and that less is more. Like I've had some terrible experiences with edible pot up in Colorado. If you overdo that, I mean, I've had some like bad trips where you're, you get stuck in thought loops and your brain's revving way too high, and you're walking around, you can't find a single room to get comfortable in, or all the lights are bugging you, or like you skip a song every 30 seconds. It's really uncomfortable. And so, I like to err on the lighter side. I haven't had like a super heroic mushroom or LSD dose. And I think even if I did, I don't think there's any way it would compare. In terms of like duration, in terms of just
Intensity.
Yeah, just the total software screw job that ayahuasca is. Like, I think all of those are still kind of layering on your reality, and I don't know, to a certain extent, at certain doses, they're kind of stacking on top of your experience or tweaking it in a certain way. And it's less of like strapping yourself into a rocket and just waiting for it to take off. So, who's gonna do it?
I'm gonna do it.
I'm totally in.
Hey.
I'm a hard pass.
Lynn?
I don't know, maybe. I'm not real drawn to it.
Yeah, I think that's a very honest thing. It's just like,
If it landed in my front door, I might give it a go.
Yeah.
Like happened with you.
yeah.
Challenge accepted.
Oh,
You're not gonna fly to Peru for it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
so.
worth
I heard
flying to
about
Peru for.
one person that did that, and another person out in the jungle started tormenting them
Oh my god.
and like throwing all their suitcase outside and stuff. Like,
You'd have to kill him.
so it was just the worst experience ever. Like, one of the nutty people there got obsessed with them and just tormented them the whole time,
Oh yeah.
which would be pure hell.
That would
like,
be absolute hell.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of the girls I knew in Colorado who'd gone to Peru and by herself, she said, "Yeah, this other girl and that was just there was having such a terrible experience. But like down there, it's like you kind of walk off into the woods. Maybe one of the shamans walks off into the woods with you. She's like, yeah, but we're still all like laying in these tents, listening to this person have like an exorcism. Like even if they're 100 yards away, you're hearing this shrieking and complete breakdown, and that is gonna affect.
It's gonna screw with your trip a little bit.
Yeah, and actually there was a moment where Ed, the guide,
Vigo
it was really great, a great babysitter and a very like gentle, calming presence, and there was a moment, of levity where I was like, maybe asking like, hey, is there anything? What should I be doing? He's like, well, just know that this is whatever you're experiencing is for the highest good for you, even if it's not pleasant right now. Or maybe he said it the next day. He was like, yeah, I just kind of came down here because you seemed like a flight risk. And I think like, man, the last thing I would do is just head out into like the Colorado wilderness, like just start walking around the neighborhood right now. That is no way am I leaving this house.
Ian's deal, it was somewhere in the States, but they approached it like kind of more like a therapy session where everybody talked a little bit and they kind of got a game plan and brought their stories to the front of what they were going for. But you sound like y'all just piled in and hung out and then did the drugs and
it was
hope for the best.
Yeah,
or
it was
worse,
less.
Not be too worse.
Yeah, it was definitely like a rolling of the dice the pajamas, but also for some reason we're all wearing like white or light gray pajamas, so it felt kind of like a Heaven's Gate thing too. Yeah, it's like, why am I with a bunch of gray-haired women and like a couple of gray-haired guys and like two of my friends, and we're all in white and gray pajamas, and there's like 4 chihuahuas in this house. Anyway,
were these wealthy, like well-to-do women that were mid-50s
Yeah.
and they were doing that? Is so crazy.
It is crazy. I don't know why the hell they're all so into it.
Right.
I mean, it's so
because
bizarre.
they grew up in the '60s.
I think-
that's why.
Yeah.
Or midlife crisis, maybe? Or are they older than midlife crisis? When do people have midlife crises these days?
Oh, right now.
Yeah. I've got
Calvin's been having one
Calvin-
for 15 years.
We passed 2 weeks now.
I'm gonna live to like 64.
It seems weird. I mean, my sister just turned 40, and it seems ridiculous to say that that's over the hill these days. That just seems utterly ridiculous.
Just halfway potentially through your life over the hill.
I feel like these days, people our age should probably feel like over the hill is 50, really. Because we're probably going to live to 100.
That's a good point.
Presumably.
Presumably, yes. Unless we keep doing all these drugs.
In which case we'll live to 120.
Probably 120, exactly.
120.
Yeah, I don't think Social Security is going to last that long.
No,
so.
it's not.
Cap it.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you err on the side of caution when it comes to doing drugs now too, because that's something that came from my experience a little bit. I can't articulate the trip itself, but I didn't do mushrooms for 10 years after the last time I did
Probably a
them.
good choice.
And when I did them, when I finally did them again, I just barely did a little bit, and I did it in a really controlled setting, and I'm not telling y'all anything. I was with y'all.
Best
when
friends that anyone could have.
But I'm erring on the side of, like, I don't do edibles. I ate edibles once and did not like it at all, and I even lied on that, and I just was never interested in doing edibles again.
Yeah.
I didn't have a DMT ayahuasca trip, to my knowledge. I've never done it, so it's hard to say. But
You'd know. To my knowledge.
the way that I
Time is a
blasted
flat
through
circle,
it
right?
made me think the same
Right
thing
now.
that you're saying, that once the train leaves the station, you need to make sure that you're ready for the ride.
Would y'all say it was a spiritual experience?
Well, what I wonder is, like, if I'd not done the second night, if I'd left on the high of the first night. I went on a hike between the 2 nights, and I felt like I was 12 feet tall, and I felt like I will always be just this enlightened, hyper-confident, like, demigod. That's what I felt like that day. I was like, I feel like I'm taking the steps of, like, a 12-foot tall person right now. And it was an amazing feeling. I felt like I had claws. Like, I felt like incredible.
You were just begging the drug to bring you low.
Oh
Yeah,
my
really, yeah, you were
god!
asking for it.
Message received. I just got slammed.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I always ask is like, yeah, man, what if I just had been able to keep riding on that and not gotten the kind of other part of the yin yang?
You'd be taking out Trump at
Oh
2020.
man. So yeah, does that answer like about it being a spiritual
Yeah.
experience? Yeah.
Did it do anything to your faith or your belief in a higher power
It definitely cultivated further appreciation that there's more mystery and that we don't have a great handle on it, and that whether that's like not thinking in terms of like monotheism or other kind of attempts to make sense of the universe and the human experience. Who knows? I have no idea. I don't think that this is an accident. I don't think this is all just kind of haphazardly come together. I think I'm personally offended that we don't have a more clear-cut like rule book for what we're supposed to be doing here. But I think I've actually embraced that, like, that's part of the experience, is to try and figure out the truths
Make
and
your journey whatever you want.
yeah, and kind of tap on the walls and above and below and around you to figure out where these kind of things start to fall apart. And I think you can get
helped with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that it's I think, like, to John's quote that we started with, is that these things do have you question reality, have you question kind of what is fed. I think part of the war on drugs is there's a quote or like the conversation that came out with Nixon was saying is like this, if we go after pot, that'd be a great way. That's how we can go after the anti-war crowd and the inner city crowd, both of which we kind of find troublesome to what we're trying to accomplish. And it's because, the anti-war crowd loved pot, and it's because the drug experience makes you realize, like, wait, why are we traveling halfway around the world and killing these people? Like, just, no, like, let them do them. And, like, I think drugs are great for breaking down programming, if you will.
In a different setting, mine might have been potentially religious because it was so powerful, or spiritual, or whatever you want to call it. But in the setting that I was in, it was not. But it did give me a healthy appreciation of the power that is out there, and I didn't fucking like it. It's very humbling, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it, and I was totally out of control, and I couldn't control it, and that has stuck with me the way that a strong spiritual experience probably does. So while I can't articulate the trip, and I didn't take away some spiritual, I guess, guide from it, I did get a healthy appreciation for what can happen.
Yeah, actually,
when you play with psychedelics.
Yeah, like I was kind of alluding to this earlier, that like about what it's like to kind of be outside of your body and the vulnerability you feel there. It's like in our kind of day-to-day operations, we feel probably some sense of security in having a home, having an able body, having money if you have resources, maybe even having guns. Like you have an ability you have recourse, you have an ability to protect yourself, to provide, and like you lose all of that when you're just like a floating piece of software in the abyss. You're like, I have no recourse. I can't push back against some sort of weird elf that wants to terrorize me. I'm just a like blob, like a cell of thoughts.
Yeah, you can't hit the eject button.
Yeah, and there's just no sense of security or I mean, I don't know, maybe for some other, like the shaman that's been there so many times, he's like, well, I can erect this bubble around myself in that space, and I can author that, and you get good at being in that space. And maybe that is the kind of preparation for death that these medicines are for, is to kind of get you to train you in that way. But oh my, the first time you go there, like you got nothing. I mean, you're just a floating baby of vulnerability.
I can't wait.
You can't wait to feel that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to, I mean, even if you pitch it as, mixed bag, or even if you pitch it as a bad experience, the way people describe it, and even you said, look, this is such a valuable experience to me. Even the bad trip was so valuable to me. Like, first of all, you can't sit around and talk about, like, time not really operating, the way we think of time operating, and not pique somebody's curiosity. You can't talk about synesthesia and not have somebody go, I want to experience that, you know? Oh, I saw these crazy shapes and or simple shapes even, and they brought this nostalgic feeling, and I was transferred from childhood memory to childhood memory. I mean, you can't say these things to somebody and not have that person go, I want to do that. And then, and then he talks about the next day where he's like, I literally was just ready to die. It was so bad. Yeah. But it's like, but at that point in time, but even then you say this was positive. It's valuable. And it's like trying to tell somebody after the fact, unless you said, look, it's just not worth it. It's so bad. My life has been ruined. Like all the consequences after the fact have been bad. But that doesn't ever seem to be the case, except for people who maybe go way too far, way too fast, something like that. Super bad trips earlier. They're not prepared. Outside of that, people all seem to really value these experiences, and their eyes seem open to new ideas, and they seem to, their personality, where it undergoes changes, undergoes positive changes and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to suggest to honestly recount your experiences on this and not pique people's interest, I think.
I hope I'm not coming off as anti-psychedelic use.
I don't think you are, no.
At all. Because after doing mushrooms again the last time, it stuck with me for well over a week, just thinking about it and chewing on it and what I went through, and the amount of time from the previous trip to this most recent trip, and why did I wait, and why did I do it again, and just really, really chewing on it. And it's been really beneficial the last time, I think. I didn't go out there and totally trip balls and lose my mind, but it was still a really cool experience. The scenery, the company, everything about it, it was very positive.
Yeah,
so.
And the data coming in corroborates that notion too. I mean, that psychedelic experiences, when in the right set and setting, with the right dosage, with the right people, et cetera, done for the right purposes, whatever, seem to be generating super positive outcomes.
Yeah.
And curing problems like PTSD and depression and anxiety, and in some instances even addiction. I mean, it's sort of people are calling it a miracle drug for a reason. That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you don't need to treat it with some respect or understand the potential downsides, or maybe when you're 18 not take like gobs of it.
Yeah, I'm in such a different place personally now than I was when I was 18 too.
Aren't we all? Thank God.
So
I wonder, does a spiritual experience have to be a positive in the moment? Like your day two could have. Why couldn't that be a spiritual experience when you went to the?
That's a great point.
Depths? I don't know. That's just been running through my mind a lot.
Yeah.
It seems to have done you a lot of good that you went through that. So.
Like what you said with Graham Hancock, dealing with a malicious entity or whatever. He said a trickster or something like that. I mean, that's probably a spiritual. You can't describe that without somebody immediately thinking, "Oh, this is sort of a spiritual encounter," and probably negative. Well, it is negative, right?
Well, and
a spiritual encounter.
Yeah, and it's hard to impart to somebody like the kind of resilience or the kind of self-trust that you do develop having like made it to the other end of something like that. Like that, it's a weird kind of self-trust and a weird kind of like I could handle this. Yeah, I could handle a terrible week at work because I handled being waterboarded by a weird elf and and I wanted to blow my brains out. I made it through that, so I can make it through whatever. Yeah,
it's like a character building exercise.
Yeah, but yeah, I think
6 weeks with I went, Officer Cade at school for the Marine Corps, and always talked about how it's like, oh man, I'm a better person for it because I was put through all this crap. But it sounds like you did it in like a few hours and got and went through even worse than what I did. It's like. Especially if you can, that's the most fascinating thing is like what can you do? I mean, if you're experiencing time on such a different level, people who smoke DMT, they'll be out for 10 minutes or whatever, and they'll come back and they'll be like, what, how is that? There was no way that was 10 minutes. There's no freaking way. I've got one quote here from one guy who did all this stuff. He's like, his quote was 1,000 years of experience in 15 minutes. To say the least, it was profound.
That's great.
Yeah. I thought that was a great quote. And I mean, it's an interesting notion, if you think about that idea that life is short, you know what I mean? And we're trying to live as much as we can and get these experiences and process them. Well, if you do it the right way, I mean, maybe you can like if you think of it as a life hack, maybe you can develop some personality and character, in a short period of time that otherwise would take you, you think about the conditions necessary to make diamonds and you're like, well, how can I create some of those in my life? Sounds like you went through one of those in your second night.
Yeah, and Yeah, I'm almost like at a loss for words now. The more that we're talking about it, the more that I think about it. Like, I don't even know what the hell happened. Like, what the hell happened? Like, it just raises so many questions.
Do you buy it for the potential negative side? Like Jordan Peterson will say, like, be cautious of unearned wisdom.
That's an interesting idea. Well, I think, and that's probably why I started, both Cade and I started with this kind of like the asterisks of that, like, this is kind of in vogue right now, but this is not to be like dabbled with. Yeah, like my, like the girls I was talking about going to the jungle, like maybe you shouldn't dabble with this. Like maybe like you need to have a strong stomach to like on a number of levels to monkey around with this stuff. Like it's and I consider myself pretty resilient and pretty thick-skinned, but that was just didn't mean anything. That was forget about it. Like doesn't matter. You could think, forget about all that.
I want to know what happens when we get Donald Trump on an ayahuasca trip. I want to know what kind of humbling takes place and what kind of president he is afterwards. Who's with me?
This man's immune to ayahuasca.
He's the one guy. Yeah. No, but there are some people actually that take it, and it takes 2, 3, 4 doses. They have to just keep drinking a bunch of it because their body just doesn't process it. There's like different levels of sensitivity to it and things like that.
He'd clear out the whole Amazon. He'd have to cut the whole place too.
He'd start he'd fly like Neo in the Matrix.
He'd fly real loud. He'd fly away. Oh man.
He is the waterboarding evil elf that you experience.
Perhaps. I will say about the flying like Neo. I definitely, flying around my childhood neighborhood was so fun. That was like, I feel like we are jumping back and forth between me saying like, don't do this. Like, don't do this. It will wreck you. It will humble you in a way. But also, if you want to have the most orgasmic, you want to fly around your childhood neighborhood while orgasming, it's pretty good. It's nice.
Sounds like it can get you on the sex offender list, but
I mean it's better than driving around orgasming in your childhood neighborhood.
I believe that.
As moderator, I'm going to steer us back onto the topic.
So anyway, buyer beware. But go for it. That's the paradox of what I have to say tonight.
But go for it. That's a great synopsis there.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, should we call
Shall
it?
we?
Yeah, great. Stuart, thank you so much, man. This has been really cool.
Pleasure.
What a great experience. I know Calvin and I are going to run off and do it immediately. We'll come back. We'll do a whole nother podcast. Yeah.
You guys should just record a podcast as you're going through it.
Yeah, that would be hectic. Well, maybe we'll film some of it. Huh?
Hectic. I think hectic would be.
Yeah.
It would be
the
hectic.
right word. Yeah.
But let's do it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, and we'll hopefully everybody come back for whatever the next topic is, which I will tell you in 5 seconds. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our search for truth. Be sure to join us again on our next podcast, where we will be discussing whether or not we are really just living in a computer simulation. We'll be exploring that and more next week when the search for truth continues.